Let's talk about the news. The news is yet another fascinating topic for me. And one of the aspects of the news that catch my attention is that across the board, wherever I've gone, and I've been on both ends of the spectrum, I have been surrounded by people on both ends of the spectrum on whatever side is passionately trying to push their narrative. And I haven't found any that say, oh, yeah, I completely trust the news. Oh, I love the news. The news seems like almost like a necessary evil, almost. But at the same time, we don't seem to act like it's a necessary evil. It's something that it's like almost like we religiously dedicate to every day or maybe every week. What's the latest in the news? At the same time, let's say we did try to eradicate ourselves of news. Well, what good would that do? I mean, the news was generated. Hold on, scratch that. The news was originally purposed. That's how I describe it. Originally purposed to keep the powerful accountable, or at least that's what they say. So we can't do away with news, but it's like can't live with it, can't live without it. There are some aspects about news that I would like to voice. This is my brain dump. That, again, I don't think I'm going to say anything that you haven't already heard before, but perhaps this could be a refresher, a reminder, an encouragement to say you're not alone. We can rally behind these concepts. And some of the concepts are bias. I'd say two of the biggest things are bias and this is going to trigger people, I think, profit. Bias and profit. In fact, I'm going to write these two things down to make sure that I don't sort of forget about them. Bias and profit. So let me make sure I want to just like talk deeply about these two things. So the first major aspect about news that comes to mind for me is it is all 100% bias. And I'm even going to the extent of saying it's bias because there's no other way. And if you see my other videos, what does that mean? Paradox. It's impossible for it not to be biased. Therefore, it is biased. It has to be biased. But is this really a paradox? Well, let's take a look. Let's dig into it. Maybe you can let me know your thoughts if you think that this is really a paradox. But let's say that a news source out there is like, look, we are fair, we are equal, we are completely unbiased. We just tell it how it is. Let me just do a really quick, small, bite-sized litmus test. Let's say somebody wanted to be completely unbiased about the news. All right, just tell me the news with a completely unbiased perspective, completely unbiased. Go. All right. So let's say, whatever the news might be. Did you hear about the robbery, about the mugging down the street or down across town? Now, wait. Hold up. Stop right there. In the 5-word sentence that you just said, did you hear about? Or 10 words, whatever it might be. Explain to me how that's not bias. Why did you choose that story to talk about? Why are you talking about it in that way? Why is your tone sounding like it's a bad thing or a good thing if we're talking about something good? So you see where this is going? We can't escape bias when we're telling the news. To even choose a news story to talk about is expressing a bias. Why are you talking about that news story? Because we feel that it is interesting to our audience. That's a bias. Because we feel it is important to our audience. That's a bias. News cannot escape bias. Right out of the gate, the very first thing just to even choose a news story is biased. And if that's biased, at least for me, I have to imagine it just gets worse and worse from there. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, just because something is biased doesn't mean it's wrong, doesn't mean it's false. I'm just, again, in my videos, I try hard not to say what is good or bad. I just try to say what is. Remind us, don't forget, the very nature of news is biased. I mean, to even be against bias is a bias, right? All right, let's talk about the other key word here, which is profit. And this is something that I don't think we think about enough. The bias we actually think about. I do, as a society, we do think about that. Maybe or maybe not as much as I think about it. But profit, I don't think we think about this nearly enough. What do I mean by profit? Well, there's a necessary, there is an aspect to society where profit is necessary. And when we, and let's say we have a news source, or we trust a news source, or we are a news source that wants to be the most ethical, diligent, noble news source out there. The problem is we'll always come across a position to where we have to choose, do we want to be profitable? Do we want to raise our profit? Or do we want to stick to our noble, ethical, truthful, honest mantra? And perhaps maybe the first time the challenge comes across our desk, we reject it. Well, no, I'm going to stick to being true and noble. But when it comes again and again and again, it becomes harder and harder to say no. But maybe we keep saying no. And this is kind of true in life in general. Maybe we keep saying no. But we forget that there are breaking points that everybody has, whether it be people or corporations, to where we have to decide, do I want to cease to exist as a news station, or do I want to take the profit because I know that'll keep us going? If the ratings are down so far that I either have to lay people off or take this news story that I really don't want to take for profit, well, at the end of the day, we don't choose evil. We choose the lesser of two evils. And I think that's worth a video in itself. We choose the lesser of two evils. So when it comes to watching the news, what I find lately, and honestly, as long as I can remember, so I don't think this is anything new. And I know that we feel that the nation's getting more polarized, the world's getting more polarized with every day, and maybe it is, but I think it's been polarized as long as I've been alive. There's been harsh battlegrounds of viewpoints and worldviews. But I want to give us this challenge. When we watch the news and we get angry, I want us to think about this, because it's impossible for the news to give to give stories that are not biased, and it's impossible for the news to not have to consider profits. So when I get angry looking at the news, I have to think about this. And I promise you, if the news is done well and we get angry after watching it, I promise you that is not a mistake. I promise you, I guarantee you that is by design. Because the angrier we get, the more we need to watch the news. The angrier we get, the more that the skew of profit plays its part in this whole system. The news needs profit. The news needs bias. That doesn't mean we shouldn't get angry. I'm not trying to put an ethical stamp on whether or not we should or shouldn't get angry. I'm just saying we need to understand if we are angry, that is by design. There's one more aspect about the news that I want to mention before I close, is that I mentioned earlier that the news was originally created to keep the powerful accountable. That's actually in when America was founded. That's one of the things that we had to allow. Freedom of the press. Freedom of the press is huge. But take it a step further, because don't you think that which holds the powerful accountable is itself powerful? Don't you think that that which holds the powerful accountable, the most powerful people in the world, don't you think that itself is a world power? So then the next question is, what's holding that power accountable? You see how this can turn into a fallacy? If the news holds people accountable, holds the powerful accountable, then the news itself is powerful. And the only way to hold that news, the power of news accountable, is to establish another news to hold that news accountable. And if news B holds news A accountable, then we need news C to hold news B accountable, who holds news A accountable, and it just keeps on going. It's a bit of a fallacy. I think I'll leave it at that. But I think the big takeaway from here is, if we get angry watching the news, take a deep breath and understand that was by design. And somebody behind the scenes is doing a phenomenal job, which is what they were hired to do. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.